Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining me for another restful episode of true, scary stories to help you fall asleep. Today, we're going to be reading true, living nightmare horror stories. I hope you enjoy them. But before we get into the stories, I would like to thank the sponsor of today's video, EerieCast. EerieCast has a new cryptid card game that released, and they sent me some cards that I wanted to check out and look at. So, I've never opened this before, but I'm going to go ahead and open it right now. Oh, I really like that packaging. I love the sticker. So this is the cryptid card game. This is a booster pack. And this is Mothman versus Wendigo. I am a huge fan of these card battling games. I've been playing Magic the Gathering since I was in high school. So games like this are definitely right up my alley. I love games like this. I cannot wait to check this one out and start playing it. And from what I've seen, I love the art of these cards. I love everything from what I've seen online. So really excited to hop into this. Ooh, it doesn't slide. It looks like it would slide, but it opens like this. That is super cool. So it shows all the cards in the Mothman deck, all the cards in the Wendigo deck. It says, insatiable hunger meets the harbinger of destruction. The gnawing cold of starvation has drawn itself near to the ruins of civilization. Which wins out in the end, hunger or chaos? In this box, you'll find two decks ready to do battle. One led by Mothman himself and his legion of gnarly creatures ready to crawl and infect the other, brought forth by the Wendigo, whose forces grow steadily stronger. Comes with a little booklet, and this is the instruction manual on how to play. And then you got your two decks in there as well. Now, let's open up this booster and see what extra cards we got here. So, got a goblin, hobgoblin, bugbear, draugr. That'll be Mrs. Interscare's favorite right there. She loves La Llorona and the story of La Llorona. Banshee, Ozark Howler, Goatman, Bloodstained Axe, Vanished Hiker's Pack, Frost Veil, Ambush Predation, Rotten Bite, Overwhelming Force, the Grim Reaper, Pack Mentality, Reversal of Fortune, and Still Waters. I really like this because this seems like it comes with a lot more cards than other games' booster packs, which I really enjoy. I really like that you're really getting a good value for your money here. This is the cryptid card game. Beautiful art, beautiful cards, and we are definitely going to be playing this game, and maybe we'll do it on a live stream or something, or maybe play a game at some point so that you guys can see what a game looks like. But anyways, thank you guys so much. Thank you, EerieCast, for supporting this video. I appreciate y'all, and I cannot wait to play this game. Anyways, without further ado, lay back, relax, and enjoy these true scary stories.
A few years back, I was into aviation and trying to get my private certification, a part of which requires a number of cross-country flights. These flights are meant to be at a minimum of 30-ish minutes each way. I forget the exact numbers, but being the hyper-involved student that I was, I hadn't planned for my first one to be at night. It was most lovely on the way there, with the sun setting and very calm weather. The turnaround was as the sun is just going down, so it's dark pretty quickly after, which shouldn't have been an issue because my CFI was instrument trained, and it was a relatively clear night. Part of the way through my flight, my CFI has me put on instrument goggles which are meant to force you to fly on instruments alone, meaning I couldn't see out of the plane. So I don't know what first happened or like where it came from, but out of nowhere, and quite uncharacteristically, my CFI claims controls and tells me to look out my window, which I oblige, expecting to see fireworks as he thinks that's what it is. Looking out the window, I don't see fireworks though. It was a flashing light flying towards our plane, and quickly. It had to have had both forward and sideways momentum to come at us the way it did, but it just kept getting closer and closer until it was maybe an arm's length from the wing on the side it was coming from, and it blinked out. To this day, I have no idea what it was or why it happened, but I know that I wasn't the only one who saw it, because my CFI and I talked about it in our debrief. I definitely thought the plane was about to get hit with something, and that we'd have to take an emergency landing, or worse.
A few years ago at my sister's bachelorette party, we went tubing down the river. It was a mix of girls mid to late 20s, and then a few of my aunts as well as my mom. We went through a company. It wasn't just a group of females with inner tubes jumping in the river. We were told the rules and paid for the trip. Unfortunately for us, the river was high and it was fast. We were mostly having a good time, despite a few moments that involved frantic paddling with hands-feet to steer away from rocks and logs until the end of the trip. They told us to watch out for a flag. It would be mounted high and easy to see ahead of time, so we could direct our tubes to the shore and get picked up by the company's bus. However, on this day they had a new staff member post the flag, and no one had checked its location ahead of time, and it was not put in the correct spot. Once we saw the flag, we had very little time to try to direct ourselves to it, and unfortunately for me, my mom and one of my aunts, we were on the opposite side of the river and the current was too strong. Would like to add it was also too deep to walk, and both my mom and aunt are barely 5 feet. We started to get scared because we didn't know where to go instead, and the river was moving us quickly. My mom's tube got stuck on a log, and my aunt tried to bump into her to get her free, but instead got herself stuck as well. They're both in their 60s, and while in good health, they're not as strong as they once were, and neither are good swimmers. The current was so fast it was crashing over their tubes, and was going to knock them off and into the water. I could tell my mom was scared. I decided to jump off my tube and swim to them, while dragging mine behind me. We had to pay if we lost our tubes, and for some reason this mattered to me a lot in the moment. I grabbed onto my mom's tube, told her to hold onto mine and my aunt to hold onto the other handle on mine. I swam perpendicular to the river current to bring us to the shoreline. It wasn't much of a shore, just the bottom edge of a steep cliff that the river cut through. That swim was the scariest thing I've ever done. There were moments I genuinely thought I was going to drown and likely die, but I couldn't give up before my mom was safe. I finally got to a point where I could touch, and I pulled my mom/aunt up to the shore. We eventually flagged down a police boat and they got us back to the pickup site. I'd like to add that I am not an athletic person. I'm a relatively strong swimmer, but only because I grew up around water. I'm overweight and out of shape, but that incident pulled something out of me I didn't know was there. I had never been so convinced that I wasn't going to see another day, but I'm glad I found the strength to get not only myself, but 2 other people out of the water that day.
I got trapped somewhere that no one ever visits, and my phone was out of reach. I work at a major airport as an IT tech. This summer I was working deep down within the airport, basement level -7, basically only used for pipes and cabling. I've only ever seen one other person down there, which has just been made even worse with COVID. I never see anyone down there now. Normally we'd work in pairs, but again, because of the virus, that wasn't allowed, and we were told to make sure that our phones were always charged. I was working within an IT cabinet and bending down a lot, so I didn't want to drop and smash my phone, so I put it on a nearby table. Whilst I was working, part of the cabinet collapsed and pinned one of my arms. It was extremely heavy, and I couldn't move my arm at all, nor could I reach my phone. I knew no one within my company knew where I was working, so I just sat and shouted for a bit, and was also trying anything to reach my phone, but it was just out of reach. After a while, I just lost hope. It felt like I'd been down there for days, lost in my own thoughts about how surely they'd be searching the airport by now, and what they'd do if they discovered my body, how my family would react, what would be on the news, all that stuff. I eventually heard some noise in the distance and started shouting and screaming a bit. Eventually I heard someone running, and man, I was never so relieved to see someone's face. He passed me my phone and I called my manager. Within minutes, my own team and multiple security guards had rushed to me, and they managed to deconstruct the cabinet and get me free. It had been 8 hours, but it felt like eternity. No serious injuries, just some pretty bad bruising. The person who found me was an engineer who'd been called out to fix a broken elevator. God knows what would have happened if that elevator hadn't been broken. And to be honest, I don't want to think about it.
I was 7 months pregnant with our first child and not sleeping well at night. I was laying in bed trying to find a comfortable position when I hear something that sounds like glasses tinkling together. I give my husband a shove and tell him what I heard. He grunts that it's probably one of our cats, rolls over and continues snoring. I still lay there. Then I hear men's voices. My heart felt like it stopped. I shove my husband hard and whisper that I hear people talking. He begrudgingly gets up. I tell him to get the gun just in case. He waves me off and heads to our bedroom door.
I see his hand pause on the handle, and then he locks our door and runs to his bedside table, getting the gun and telling me to call 911 because he hears guys in our house. We both go into our bathroom, shut the door. I'm in the closet calling 911, and he's halfway in the closet doorway and halfway crouching behind our dresser with the gun pointed at the door. We're both shaking. I tell the 911 operator what's going on and our address. They say that police are en route.
While waiting, both my husband and I have the same thought. Earlier in the day, I had been on his computer. He's a gamer and has several monitors, working on lesson plans for when I went on my maternity leave on one monitor and watching the show Supernatural on the other. When my husband got home from work, I just paused the show and hung out with him. So now we are hiding in the closet with a gun and wondering if one of our cats jumped on the desk and accidentally stepped on the keyboard and unpaused it.
I tell the 911 operator all of this, and my husband decides to go listen at the door again. He comes back saying it's silent, and we're like, what are the chances that a cat unpaused the video and then paused it again? The 911 operator says police have arrived, put our gun away and meet them at the front door. As soon as we leave the bedroom, we see my giant Maine Coon straight up laying across the keyboard like a fat little butthole. Yeah, we got the crap scared out of us, and 5 cop cars showed up at our house because my cat unpaused the computer. My husband now refers to that night as the night of the naked gun. I nearly froze to death in an ice cream freezer in a grocery store early one morning, and to this day, I suspect that my lunatic supervisor hated me so much that he put me on ice cream duty knowing full well that the door was broken and traps people inside. At 8 a.m., no one could hear my bang and scream at the door because there are few workers, and their path didn't take them anywhere near the ice cream freezer. Stupid me forgot to charge my phone before work, and my phone was dead. Not that it matters, there's no cell phone service inside those thick metal walls. God only knows what would have happened if I wasn't able to smash the door open at long last. My supervisor only ever checked on me once per shift. I quit that very same day.
In 2012, I worked for a retail store as a manager. One morning, half asleep from working 60 to 70-hour weeks, I arrived early to count the monies and prepare the deposit before opening. And as I turned around to lock the front door behind me, a guy is running full speed at me. It took me about 5 seconds to realize what was happening, as he grabbed the front door and we fought. Me to pull it closed and lock it, him to open it and apparently rob me. Well, he was bigger, stronger, and most important, heavier than me. He had the advantage of pushing rather than pulling the door, so he used his weight against the door, pushing with a bigger body and probably 30-50 pounds on me. He won, pushed inside, pulled a gun, and pressed it into my right lower rib cage. I froze and put my hands up. In my training, they would tell us to comply with a robber's demands in order to save ourselves. So I asked what he wanted. He said, "Turn off the alarm." I did. I said, "Okay, what next?" He says, "Open the office." I did. He said, "Open the safe." I did. He says, "Pull out all the bills and put them in my bag," indicating a green JanSport backpack he was carrying. While I was carefully and deliberately transferring the bills, making sure not to look at him and to keep my hands visible at all times, I asked, "Please don't hurt me. I'm not going to try anything." He says, "That ain't why I'm here. Just give me all the money, then I'm going to leave, and I want you to go back to the back room and stay there till I'm gone." I finish transferring the money, then he sees the drop safe, a small locked compartment where we keep the money deposited from the previous day's cash sales, and asks, "What's in there?" My brain was working on an instinctive survival level, and had worked out that if I tripped that alarm, it might put me in a hostage situation if the police showed up before he left, which was entirely possible because they usually responded within a few minutes to this sort of alarm, something I'd witnessed when a coworker once opened this after 7 p.m., the time when it automatically turned on the silent alarm. Knowing this, I said, "That's the drop safe, but it has a silent alarm on it." He says, "Okay, never mind. Go to the back of the store now and stay there till I'm gone." I did. I waited in the back room for roughly 5 minutes. I think each minute seemed like an hour with the amount of adrenaline I had pumping through my veins, then went out to make sure he was gone. I kept low and snuck up to the front of the store and saw no one. I locked the front door and called the police, reported the robbery, gave a description of the robber, which wasn't detailed because I didn't look at him, fearing he'd hit me or something. All I knew was that he was black and young, and the clothes he was wearing. He had a hoodie with the hood pulled tight so I could only see mouth, nose, and eyes. Then I called my DM, then my regional LP manager, and made the obligatory reports to those people. At that point, I'd run out of directives from my training. I sat in the office in a daze until my DM sent over someone to relieve me. After that, he told me to call someone to pick me up. I called my best friend who picked me up and brought me home. He stayed with me until my wife got home. My DM told me to take the next 3 days off and call him if I needed any kind of counseling therapy. Some people have panic attacks or cry, freak out in some way, but I didn't. I just felt numb and shocked. Later that evening, the whole experience began to replay in my mind, over and over like a bloody movie. That was the thing that really freaked me out. PTSD, I guess. It continued for 3-4 weeks, paired with some nightmares, but eventually it got better. And I'd say the only lasting effect is that I am much more aware of my surroundings when I am by myself and in a vulnerable position, and that I watch people's behavior more closely to determine their motives and to protect myself and my family from harm. That, and I remember the whole thing like it happened yesterday, despite the fact it was 11 years ago. Be careful, retail workers. Don't let this happen to you. Never enter a store alone. Peace and love to all y'all. We were having a meeting in a windowless conference room. There were about 7 of us. Suddenly, we felt our chairs jolt. The room went black, and we heard a huge 4-second muffled roar of an explosion. We filed out of the room and to the brighter office to look out of the narrow floor-to-ceiling windows. The power was out. The computer screens were dark. Looking out, we could see snow gently falling. Up on the 71st floor, we were often in a cloud. Standing next to the floor fire warden, I noticed he stood straight and silent, listening for the PA system to announce the cause of the outage. Silence. We later learned the system was destroyed in the blast. I looked behind me into the hallway and could see thick black smoke shooting up under the cargo elevator doors. I turned to him and said I'm leaving. I opened the stairwell doors. A coworker started to cry. I told her, let's go downstairs together. We scrambled down. At about the 45th floor, we hit an enveloping wall of black smoke. I fell on my knees at the landing, but I couldn't breathe nor see. It felt like being underwater in the dark. I crawled around until I felt a step. First time thought I would die. Grabbing a railing, I shot up the stairs until I could see again. People were streaming from the upper stairwell into an office around the 50th floor. It was hazy with smoke. I found my crying coworker. People were dropping coats at the bottom of the glass hallway doors, trying to block the incoming smoke. There were over 100 people sitting on the floors, others milling about, some sobbing. Someone panicked and threw a chair out of the window. My knees were trembling. Second time thought I would die today. I stuck my head out of the window and was relieved to see people streaming out of the building. I found a payphone on the wall and called my fiancé. He told me the explosion was in World Trade Center Building 2, not my building. Telling him I could barely see the phone I was talking into, he denied I should be in any smoke at all. Thanks. Please call my mom and tell her I'm trying to get out. The conversation was so stupid I felt better. After about 2 hours, a fireman emerged and said it was clear enough to descend the stairs. We started to slowly walk down, one hand on the railing, one on the person in front of us. Much of the descent was in complete darkness. A floor below me, someone panicked, started to scream and block the stairwell. We couldn't continue. Third time thought I would die. Eventually he was calmed and continued the descent. Until around 4 p.m., we finally reached the ground level and exited to the street. My purse and coat were up on 71. It was cold and still snowing. I walked to the subway and rode uptown to the bus terminal. People were staring at me in disbelief. It wasn't until I looked in the mirror that my face and clothes were covered in soot. My nose was so full of soot, it made a crunching sound when I pinched it. I met up with other employees at the bus terminal and was given a coat to go home.
We'd gone to an island for Christmas. It was the day before my daughter's second birthday, and we, plus my wife's sister and her husband and child, decided to visit one of the spectacular waterfalls. A proper, welded-together Mad Max truck took us halfway up the mountain, with us having to walk the rest of the way. My almost 2-year-old had to be carried, so I picked her up and walked up the trail. It wasn't far before I lost my footing on the damp leaves, fell, and, still holding my girl, began to slide. I had no real concerns. After all, I've fallen plenty. But I began to slide. Holding my daughter's head with one hand, I grabbed at everything I could with the other, but carried on sliding relentlessly. I glanced over my shoulder to see a drop just meters away. A big drop. An unsurvivable drop with nothing to stop us from falling. I rolled onto my back with my daughter, crying on my chest, holding her tight with the hope that she, at least, would be okay, when at the very edge, I managed to push my foot into the vegetation that grew there. We stopped sliding. My wife and brother-in-law were scrambling down towards us and took my daughter from my arms and carried her away. I stayed there, entangled in the bushes, and smoked 2 cigarettes silently, with one leg dangling over the cliff. I didn't speak at all for the rest of the day. When we visited the temple for her birthday the next morning, we meant it.
I was 18 years old and just graduated high school 3 months prior. I was married. I eloped my senior year of high school. We had rented a very small one-bedroom house that was across the street from the bank where I worked as a teller. We hadn't lived there very long, maybe a month or so. We were young and barely making ends meet, so there were not a lot of decorations, pictures, etc. I was always a very trusting person. I was raised in the country, and in times where you could leave your windows open and your doors unlocked. I was always taught to see the good in people. I had come down with a cold and taken cold medicine one night and went to bed early. At this point, I had only been married for less than 6 months. I remember in my sleep feeling someone messing with me. In my half-asleep cold medicine bogged down head, I started reacting and thinking it was my husband. Then I roused up and opened my eyes. It was around 2 in the morning. I looked over at my husband kind of laughing and said, "What are you doing?" Only he was sound asleep facing the other direction. Puzzled, I looked forward. There, at the foot of my bed, with the streetlight shining in my window, crouched a gray-haired man. He was looking straight at me. It was then I noticed the weird smell. Alcohol and food mixed together. It registered something was very wrong. Out of natural reaction, I screamed. When I screamed, my husband jumped up facing me. At almost the exact same moment, the man jumped up and ran out of the bedroom door. The bedroom door was located right beside the head of the bed, on my husband's side of the bed. Since he jumped up looking at me, he did not see the man run out. He asked me what was wrong, but I was so scattered nothing coming out of my mouth made any sense. He kept saying it was okay, and I just had a bad dream and everything was just fine. I can't describe the panic I felt inside. I refused to lay back down. I got up from the bed and walked into the next room, living room, and my husband followed me. Once we entered the living room, it was all becoming reality. The front door to the house was propped open with a brick. The rocking chair we had was moved out of the way of the doorway to the bedroom. My assumption is he was making sure he had a clear shot of the house. Laid all over the floor was the contents of my purse. Only a few dollars was missing. My social security card, a change purse, and a photo. Seeing as how we were young and broke, we didn't have a home phone. Cell phones were not a thing at this time. We were trying to get pants and shoes on to go call the cops when we heard a car door shut. I started screaming, "Oh my God, he is going to steal our car." My husband went to the door to see a female officer walking towards our house. I immediately started rambling how there was a man. He was in my house. He messed with me. He touched me, and I needed help. I know I looked like a crazy person who was babbling nonsense. The officer calmed me down and asked me to tell her what happened. I repeated myself. She asked if I knew what he looked like and if I could identify him. I said yes. To this day, that man's face and hair haunt my thoughts. It is permanently in my brain. She then went on to explain that she was making rounds and found a man running across the road suspiciously. She stopped him and was taking him for public intoxication. When he got into the back seat, he was trying to stuff my change purse inside his pocket. She took it and reverse searched my social security number to find that I lived just a road over from where this man was picked up. Divine intervention. The man claimed I was a friend of his, and he had left my house not long ago from hanging out. My house was fingerprinted and pictures taken, diagrams drawn. They tested his hands and fingernails for my DNA. I had to go to court and testify. I found out I was pregnant just weeks later. I had constant nightmares and became very jumpy. The stress from everything threatened my baby, so we agreed to accept a plea bargain. I found out he was living in a camper that was parked in front of the bank where I worked. That month I was the teller assigned to drive through. I was facing his camper daily. I walked to and from work because it was just across the street and took more effort to drive. Plus, we only had one car. They also found other items from my house inside his camper upon searching it. That confirmed he had been in my house before. He actually saw my husband in the bed next to me and walked around him to my side of the bed. He was on a mission. I finally got through court. He was sentenced and I tried to move on. About 4 to 5 years later, I received a phone call from the police department a city over. There was a new law passed, and every prisoner that was imprisoned for a sexual-related offense had to submit their DNA. There is a hit. The same man who broke into my home had hit on a series of high-profile cases in the next city over. They were brutal. No one ever saw him. Just one girl saw tattoos on his arms behind her. He would tie them up and use tape on their eyes. Shockingly, we all had similarities. He had a type. The girl that saw the tattoos had given a description, and it was televised on the news. I guess he ran to the next town in hopes of running away from it. At the time, they caught him at my house, had the tape and everything on him. It just didn't make sense at the time why. Now all of the dots started to connect. All of us were between 17 and 23. This man was almost 60. Then, all those years later, I realized had I been home alone, it would have been so much worse. I didn't have to deal with some of the same horrible things the other girls did. But it still really messed me up. It caused my marriage problems because I didn't feel protected. I have PTSD, but I am a very lucky lady. God was really watching out for me, and I am thankful it was not worse than it was. By far the scariest thing that has ever happened to me. I'm sorry it was so long. Not something I tell a whole lot of people. I had a friend not believe me one time saying it was crazy sounding, until she saw the sentencing on the news. I was used as a witness for the other girl's case, showing the career history of the man and all of the similarities. He was sentenced and put away for the rest of his life.
It's amazing that I have lived to tell this. My husband and I were on vacation at a fancy all-inclusive resort in Cancun, Mexico. We were young. We dressed up and brought all of our best jewelry. He, a gold Rolex, gold chain and bracelet. Me, my new diamond bracelet and beautiful engagement ring. Everyone was so nice our first morning in paradise, and at breakfast we met a nice young lady who took the time to stop and chat a while. Later that evening, we went downtown to the shopping areas and loved it. It was getting quite dark, and as we were starting to head back to our resort, the same super friendly young lady appeared and offered us a ride back, as she was going there anyway. This was fantastic. Yes. We hopped in her van and she told us that she had one quick stop. Was it okay? Of course. We pulled up to an insanely loud night spot with a home connected to it right next door. A locked iron gate surrounded the courtyard. Come on in. She smiled and beckoned. We jumped out of the van and stood beside her, suddenly shaking uncontrollably as she unlocked the gate. We went in. She shakily locked it. We got to the front door, and as she opened it and ushered us in, we were speechless to see a giant room. All the walls were white tiles to the ceiling. Along the wall, giant sink, hoses. The floors were also solid white with huge drain holes in the area. Super well lit up. We were standing with her, shaking more than ever. Innocent, young and confused, we stood silently as she called up the stairs, "Julio, Julio, Julio." When she had no response, she hysterically ran up the stairs only to find that one door locked. She said, "Let's go," and we obediently followed her out to the van. Her whole demeanor changed. She was mean and wild. She drove crazily away from the blasting music next door, speeding away for what seemed like forever. She came to a screeching halt and said, "Get out." In the pitch black, middle of nowhere. We did again as we were told. It was then that we realized our stupidity. Our lives had been spared from the slaughterhouse. The sinks, the noise to cover our screams, the drains in the floors, all for our jewelry. Julio the butcher was nowhere to be found that lucky night. We walked until we saw streets, took a taxi back to our resort in complete silence, locked every piece of jewelry in our safe, and thanked God for us being spared. We never saw her again, but I will never, ever forget her. I'm gonna go anonymous, because this is really, really heavy, and it's something that I've promised myself that I would never reveal. And so far, I've kept that promise and never told anyone about it, not even my therapist. I've tried my best to forget about it forever, but it keeps coming back to me. It haunts my nightmares, and at odd, awkward waking moments, I'm paralyzed by flashbacks and left shivering and shaking and blubbering like a 2-year-old for seemingly no reason. I really, really don't want to post this, but it's in my head now. I can't sleep and it's not going away. I might as well write it down and get it out in the open once and for all. In the cold light of dawn, I'm probably going to regret this and spend the next 6 months beating myself up about it. Well, tough crap. I've been beaten up by bigger and tougher guys before. Maybe later everyone can come on over, drag me out into the street, and stone me for my ignominy. At least I know my dog still loves me. The place? Silverton, Pretoria, South Africa. The year? 1986. Friday, 4th of July. Shortly after 1630. Or, for anyone who doesn't know military time, 4:30 p.m. I just turned 43. I was working in Silverton and had knocked off work for the day. As is usual, I stopped off at Checkers to get some stuff. On this particular day, it was the usual: bread, milk, eggs, and some tomatoes as something extra. As is usual, I parked my motorcycle on the sidewalk in a very convenient spot between an ornamental concrete trash bin and the bus shelter. I did my shopping and was in the checkout queue, nearly up to the till when I remembered that I'd forgotten to get the tomatoes. Screw it, I thought. I'm not going to get them now and have to stand at the back of the queue again. I paid for my stuff and left. I boarded my bike, drove around the bus shelter and eased into the traffic. Then the bomb in the trash bin went off. It was like someone hit me in the back with a sledgehammer. I was flung, bike and all, into the gutter. I lay there dazed and disoriented, and everything was deathly silent. Then the screaming started. It sounded far, far away, and as if I had cotton wool stuffed in my ears. I crawled out from under my bike, and remember that strangely it was still running. I turned it off, staggered to my feet, and looked around. My God, the carnage. People running around screaming and bleeding. Blood and guts and gore everywhere. Half a leg wearing a sock lying on the sidewalk in front of me. And I'm staring at it all. And all I can think is like, where's his shoe? He must have a shoe. He's lost his shoe. His shoe. His shoe. There's a woman with her arm, shoulder, and half her face a bloody pulp. A body on the ground looking like it had been put through a meat tenderizer. Chunks of flesh everywhere. Kids scattered all over the place like discarded rag dolls. Screaming, crying. Blood. Gore. Glass. Chunks of concrete. Wreckage. Screaming. 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 People are climbing out of their cars, rushing to help. And I'm just standing there, shivering and shaking and waving my arms. And screaming and yelling, no, 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 stop, stop, run away, run. There'll be another bomb. Run, run. I could hardly hear my own voice, and it seemed like no one else could hear me either. I puked. I grabbed my bike. It started and I gunned away. I was rounding the corner when the other bomb went off. My bike skidded and I fell again. I just lay there. I was just lying there and shivering and shaking and gasping for breath and blubbering and crying. I remember there were flashing lights and sirens and hooting and yelling and shouting, and I could hear the screaming. That awful, terrifying screaming. I must have passed out cold because the next thing I remembered was that I was freezing. My whole body ached. Every muscle in my body was so stiff and sore that I could hardly move. I'd gotten my breath back, so I retrieved my bike, which miraculously was still okay, and rushed home. Thankfully, when I got there, I was the first home. I dropped my backpack, helmet, gloves, jacket, and boots on the kitchen floor, stripped off my clothes, stuffed them in a plastic shopping bag, and hid them at the bottom of the outside garbage bin. I ran a hot bath, locked the door, climbed in the tub, and just lay there, aching all over, and shivering and shaking and rattling, blubbering and bawling and crying, till I thought the bath was going to overflow with tears. And all the time I'm thinking, I could have been dead. If I'd remembered the tomatoes, I would have been dead. I should have been dead. Why wasn't I dead? I deserved to be dead. How could I not be dead? How could I be practically on top of an exploding bomb and still walk away with hardly a scratch? Why were other, better people and innocent children slashed, smashed, shattered, scarred, marred, mauled, mutilated, maimed, crippled, blown to smithereens, and for all I knew, killed, while a nobody, a useless, bawling, blubbering, puking nobody like me, is allowed to walk away with hardly a scratch? I wished I was dead. Right now, as I'm writing this more than 30 years later, my face is numb, my hands are numb, I'm cold, I'm shivering, and I'm really wishing that I was dead. Then, this whole horrible, hellish nightmare will finally be over. Well, one of the more disturbing things I've seen was when I visited London in 1991. I was walking down a busy street when I suddenly came across a dead body. An old lady had jumped from her balcony just seconds before I turned the corner, and I nearly stepped on her because I was looking at a tourist map while walking. It was a very sad sight. She was lying face down on the pavement, arms stretched out, and one of her legs was at a weird angle, having probably been broken by the fall. She looked to be at least 80 or 90 years old, and she was dressed in a woolly jumper and had a nice old-fashioned skirt on, just a regular grandma. Other people quickly gathered to watch, but nobody did anything. This was in the days prior to cell phones, so somebody would have to run off somewhere and make a call, but nobody did. I thought of doing it myself, as did probably most of us, but I was 14 at the time and too stunned to move. I'd never seen a dead person before, and to my great shame, I just stood there. Not everyone had the same reaction, however. This was during lunch hour, so as I said before, the street was very busy, and quite a few pedestrians had places to go to, and wouldn't let the scene of a self-unaliving stop them. So they simply stepped over the body and went on their own way with an "oh dear, what a shame." Some of them hardly even looked up from their newspapers. Too busy checking the stock market, I suppose. It made me sick. Eventually, somebody must have alerted the authorities because the police and ambulance arrived quickly, and the area was cordoned off. We were all ushered away. But even today, nearly 30 years later, I can picture her lying there, and I wonder what made her do it. Did she have nothing left to live for? Was she in pain and unable to pay the hospital bills? Had her relatives died and left her alone? Perhaps she was being evicted and had nowhere else to go. I'm sure that this happens all the time, much more so in large cities than anywhere else. But each case is tragic, and I think that we could do well to remember to care a bit more about our elderly citizens, and not simply dismiss them as old relics as soon as they reach their pension age. Volunteer, keep them company, spend some time with them, and cheer up their day.
A few years ago, I owned a home and business cleaning and auto detailing business. I started working for a woman with whom I'd gone to high school. Her sister has been one of my closest friends throughout our adulthood, and therefore, I was somewhat familiar with the goings-on in that family. They had 4 kids, 3 girls and a boy, and the father was abusive, primarily to the teenage son. But I think most people in the house got a taste of it. The house was always a disaster. You couldn't tell I had ever been there from one time to the next. My biggest problem was with the guns, though. There were guns everywhere. There would be a massive pile of laundry on the couch, and as I began to fold it, I would find a gun. There were handguns in the kitchen cupboards. There were rifles propped up in the corner of the kitchen. I'm not handy with firearms. I don't know how to check to see whether or not it's loaded. I don't know how to check the safety. Therefore, I was very uncomfortable with all of these guns laying around. Not to mention the fact that there were 4 kids, ranging in age from 316 at the time, and the ammo was in a low, unlocked kitchen cupboard. I told my client that until the guns were locked away, I wouldn't be coming back. She agreed to put them away, and for a while things were okay. One morning I walked in to find a pistol on the kitchen table, with a loaded clip right next to it. I asked her why it was there, and almost in a manner of laughing it off, she said that her husband, who owns a cement company, had gotten upset with one of his employees, came home and loaded the gun. I guess when he cooled down, he took the clip out of the gun and laid them both on the table. She promised that it wouldn't happen again, but at this point, I already know that this man has abusive tendencies. Now, I know that when he is upset with someone, he immediately goes for the firearms. So, on what would be my next to last week at the house, I walked in and found candle wax all over one of the walls, and broken glass and more wax on the floor. I asked the kids what had happened, and they stated that their dad had become angry with the son and had thrown a large candle at him. It didn't occur to me until later that it had to have been lit when he threw it, given the wax on the wall. That same day, the dad came home from work early. He and his wife were arguing in the kitchen when he threw a large metal shelf from a refrigerator at her. It hit her foot and broke her big toe in half long ways. Because there was a witness, me, he kept trying to say that he threw it to her, but she missed the catch. Obviously, that was not the case. The following week, when I went to clean the house, I convinced the wife to go to the police to file charges. I would take her and be a witness. We went. The charges were filed. They ended up arresting the father at one of the kids' schools because the school was given instructions to not allow him to pick up the kids. And when he was told as much, he lost a grip and was arrested. The wife and kids stayed at a shelter for a night or two, and then they went to stay with her sister. Exactly 1 week after we went to the police, she dropped the charges and they all went home. I still do not understand how or why she was allowed to drop the charges, because we both gave detailed descriptions of the abuse against the son in our statements to the police. This is the point when I should have done more. I should have followed up with CPS or the police or someone. I shouldn't have let it go. In late October of 2019, I got a call from my friend, the sister of my client, and she was hysterical. The son, the one who had suffered so much abuse at the hands of his father, had shot and unalived himself. He was 16. At the time, I thought I had done what I could. Thinking back, I should have pressed so much harder. I'm truly sorry that I didn't do more to save you, NSS.
I was parked in a certain spot at my last job for 12 years that I was there. It was accessible to the public as it wasn't company parking, but they wanted us to park in the back of the lot, so the closer spots could be available for customers. One day, my spot's taken by a dark-tinted caddy, and I'm immediately angry because everyone knows it's mine. It's morning shift, so 4 a.m., so it can't be one of the others because I know what they drive. So maybe it's a newbie, or maybe another employee from another shop in the plaza. It's still there on my lunch break, and when I go home, And the next day, I come in at 1 p.m. till close, around 9:30, and then also the next. Something about it really bothered me. It smelled wrong. Literally. It's the South in high summer, and who knows what's baking in there. My dad was a Marine and then a police officer. He always said that if you feel something is wrong, there probably is. So I dialed the non-emergency contact police number. I felt like an idiot, but every time I walked by it bugged me. So I was stuck waiting for over an hour before anyone shows up. And honestly, if I hadn't been off the next day, I would have been like, screw it. But I waited, mostly because I can be a really petty jerk, and that's my spot. The police show, all annoyed because who knows how many they can't park their calls they get. They run the license plate though, and then things go crazy. They want my info, want me to contact my manager. Does this lot have cameras? Have I touched the car, etc.? Apparently the car is on Amber Alert as the last sighting of a missing person who was a minor, a 15-year-old girl. When they pop the trunk, they find her dead, mutilated body under a blanket, and the source of the smell. She had gone out with her much older, controlling and insecure boyfriend, but had decided to get out of the relationship. She only made the mistake of getting into the car with him. He drove 3 counties over after torturing her, stuffing her in there and who knows what else. Then parked and walked away, left her to die in the trunk. I never learned her time of death, so it haunts me sometimes thinking that she might have been saved if I'd made a fuss earlier. So yeah, listen to your gut, even if it seems petty. When I was really young, we were crossing a massive bridge. I remember the sudden traffic and my family talking about what it could be about. We finally got to the point on the bridge where we saw what's happening. I'll never, ever forget the way the sunbeams went through the clouds, just like a movie. A woman in big black sunglasses, blonde hair, smiling, and on the other side of the bridge. My grandfather said it was an angel, and I truly believed that for a long time. It wasn't until I was showering when I was way older and randomly thought of that time and realized that she was going to jump. It's disturbing how happy she was, but probably in so much pain. I remember her stretching her arms out while holding the railing to really extend herself over the edge. She was ready for it. When I was about 7 years old in the Philippines, while I was on my way to buy snacks from the convenience store, I saw my auntie, but she quickly dragged me home. Everyone on the street seemed to be running for their lives. It turns out a murder just occurred and the killer was on the loose. I peeked outside to see the killer shirtless and bloody all over. His eyes were wide open and he was carrying a machete. He was walking down the street and it was a pretty horrific thing for 7-year-old me to see. A coworker confided in me one day at lunch about an incident that sounded like child abuse to me. The guy's name is Byron Morales. I give that detail because this is a true account of what unfolded after the day. Look it up. Byron told me that he doubted he would be allowed to babysit his stepchild again after his wife came home and caught him spinning circles while holding the baby by the feet. When I asked why, he said, to toughen him up. The kid's a sissy mama's boy and I wanted to toughen him up. That blew me away. I didn't know how to respond. So I went to my boss and told him the story. He told me that there was nothing we could do. To this day, I wish I had contacted the state of Iowa and reported Byron for child abuse, but I didn't. Instead, I tried to forget about it. I still had to work closely with the guy on a daily basis, but I didn't like him after that. Fast forward about a month. our home phone rings. It's my boss telling me to look at that day's local paper. There, I find an article about the death of the child in question. Byron was the only person home with him when the child fell down the stairs, according to the stepdad. My boss tells me that I was right, and we hang up. I didn't know what to do. For some reason, I was expecting the police to visit the guy's workplace searching for clues like we see on TV, but that's not what happened, and it was really bugging me, so I finally called the police. They were interested in hearing my story. There was a deposition eventually, and then later I testified at Byron Morales' murder trial for the death of Kevin. Byron was convicted and sentenced to life with no chance of parole. One day I was in a grocery store and approached by a woman who said she was on the jury and wanted to thank me for my testimony. She told me that my testimony helped remove any reasonable doubt and made the task of convicting the guy easier. That conversation made me feel better, but I still regret not getting involved before Kevin was murdered. Thank you so much for listening to all of the stories in this video. I hope you enjoyed them. I also hope that you enjoy the extra rain at the end. Get a good night's sleep, everyone, and I'll read to you in the next video. Bye-bye now.